What's up, everybody? Reed Wallach here, joined as always by Cody Williams. This, of course, is Stacking the Box College Football Edition, Week 13. We got 2 weeks left in the regular season, and it feels like we know absolutely nothing about how this is all going to play out.
Right.
We still have some chaos scenarios on the table. We have about 15 teams vying for 12 spots, more or less,
Mhm.
and a lot to get into. Cody, what's going on, man? How was your week 12 and how you feeling going into week 13?
I picks wise, I felt like I was close on a couple and just couldn't quite get them home. Thought I might be able to pull back ahead of you, but overall, man, I'm enjoying the chaos. Like as a college football fan, you got to embrace the chaos because who cares? Like you and I don't have any skin in the game. Wisconsin's not making the playoff. North Carolina's not making the playoff, so we get to just sit back and enjoy it all.
Yeah, I would say enjoy it, but Wisconsin did kind of blow their chance to really score
It's
a big
true.
one on Saturday. One of the it's starting to build up here, these Luke Fickle close calls and big games. Would have been nice to
Mhm.
pull one out there against number one Oregon, but Oregon does survive. As we get into the show, we're going to do our updated top 12 college football playoff rankings, and I have a feeling that Cody, yours and I brackets will look the same after number one, with Oregon staying there as they go into their bye week ahead of week 14 when they host Washington in a Pac 12 rivalry redone Big Ten style season finale. So, Cody, let's just get into it then. Let's get right into the
Yeah.
bracket. Some of the key results from last week and what we said was somewhat of a lackluster type of slate. A lot of the juice was kind of sucked out of it, just given how the season has gone. This week, not the case, though. And I think it was funny. Saturday night, I watched the games, and I always start to look at the following week's slate, just like kind of get an idea of what's going on next week. And it's just funny when I was thinking, like, all right, big game there. Oh, that's funny. This game doesn't matter anymore. I landed on the three biggest games of the week, or
Mhm.
four even biggest games of the week in no order. Indiana, Ohio State, Kansas, Kansas, Colorado, BYU, Arizona State, and Army, Notre Dame, to me, are
Yep.
the four biggest games of the slate. Who would have saw that coming? That any of those four would be the four
Right.
biggest games of the slate going into week 13 if you would have asked in August.
No, 100%. It speaks to the chaos that we have seen in this college football season. Like, regardless of what you think is going to happen in Indiana, Ohio State, like, no one saw Indiana being in the spot. And, like, according to FPI on ESPN, they have a 97% chance of still making the college football playoff, regardless of what happens in this Ohio State game. That 3% chance is the 3% chance that they lose to Purdue in the season finale. So, like, we have that game. Army, Notre Dame, like, you talk about Notre Dame, like, you wouldn't have even said this in September after Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Like we could have been like, oh, this Notre Dame team's not going to be anywhere near sniffing the playoff if they're going to look like that. They haven't looked like that since then. And then this Army team, Army's like the real chaos agent. I don't think that they're going to, but like if they were to upset Notre Dame, there's a chance that you can make a case for them to jump like Boise State as the G5 champion in like the current projected rankings that we're seeing.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely possible, and that's what makes this all great. We got to see. We'll see. Again, we're going to talk some Indiana, Ohio State. We're going to talk some of the bigger games on the card. We'll see if some chaos real like if we're sitting on chaos now, and it's a matter of will the real chaos begin, if that makes sense. Like it's all leading to this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all will it really come to fruition? Will we really see Indiana go to the Big Ten championship game? Will we see Army in the college football playoff? I feel like this is like the culminating week for a lot of these things.
Oh
So
yeah.
let's get into our little bracket, our little projected brackets here. I have all three now. We've been doing this 3 weeks. I got all three right here.
I love it.
So we could do like a little progression sheet maybe if I get bored one night. But so let's get through the easy stuff. Oregon won.
Yes, Oregon won. Easy. No, no. I actually do have a question about Oregon because I do a projected AP top 25 late on every
Okay.
Saturday night. Where would you have ranked Oregon had they lost to Wisconsin? Because it's a very tricky proposition right now because they have the head to head over Ohio State. Obviously, losing to Wisconsin is a way worse loss, but like, where do you put them in that hierarchy?
So I'm not a big AP poll, but like I don't really subscribe to it all that
Yeah,
much anymore. So in the AP poll, it's more like a what have you done for me lately type thing, right?
it
Like it's
really
like kind of
is.
yeah. So like in that regard, they probably have to fall behind. I don't know what the AP poll was last week, but if I had just off the top of my head, they fall behind Ohio State, they fall behind Texas,
Okay.
Like, yeah,
I
they
don't
probably
think
fall
you. I
behind.
don't think you fallen behind Penn State, who is at 4. Like I think 3, or I think
Okay,
you
I
probably
think
drop
that's
them to
fair.
3 or 4.
Road
Yeah.
game still like in the college football playoff. So I think 3's fine. I didn't realize Penn State was 4 because I would have potentially maybe put Indiana ahead of Oregon just for this week, just given that
Yeah.
they're still undefeated.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It's just I'm with you. Like we do the projected AP poll, frankly, because people like to read about the projected AP
Yeah.
poll. You know, that's the business that we're in. So, but like I do subscribe to the idea that like you can't take but too much stock in it. Although it is interesting to compare like what the college football playoff bracket's going to look like tonight, and you know what the AP voters are thinking right now.
100%. To Texas?
Yeah, still Texas.
Okay, so I've been chewing on for the last like week or so.
Mm-hmm.
If Texas loses to Texas A&M on the road next week, kind of getting tough to put Texas in the playoff.
Yeah, 100%.
And by the way, we've seen, and I know when push comes to shove and it's the final ranking, we'll see what they really do. But we've seen this year, and I know it's like kind of a show, but the committee's quick to penalize some of these teams on losses. You saw Georgia fall out of the top 12 with this. And again, we're doing a bracket, not necessarily the actual ranking, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going by bracket. You start to look at Texas' resume. Their best wins Vanderbilt. I mean, it's just something to think about. As I mean, they're probably going to win this week, and then we'll see how it goes next week.
No, 100%, because I think if Texas loses to Texas A&M, Texas A&M is going to vault into the top 12, so like that's probably going to complicate things further. They're going to be in the SEC championship game as well, as long as they hold serve until that point. And you then start to compare. Basically, to me, that would start to become a question of, okay, Texas or Tennessee. Well, Tennessee has the better win. They beat Alabama, and like that is the better win. And granted, Texas's 2 losses might be better than what Tennessee has with the Arkansas loss hanging over them, but I do think that those quality wins end up mattering more when the committee's trying to make these decisions.
Yeah, I just think it's something interesting to think about as we move through the next few weeks. 3, I kept Miami against SMU, but I kept Miami there.
Yeah, I mean, Miami is still going to be ranked ahead of SMU, so as the bracket comes out tonight, it's going to be Miami. I'm excited to see what that ACC championship game would look like.
Yeah. 4, I was a week early on this one, but Colorado.
See, 4, I have, based on what the bracket is going to look like tonight, I have Boise State at 4.
Okay. I still don't think Boise State's all that great, to be honest.
I don't either. To be clear, Boise State is showing a lot of cracks in the armor right now, and there's a good chance that they slip up before this thing is all said and done. But if we're just talking about what the bracket's going to look like tonight, the AP voters penalized BYU pretty heavily. And like you just said, the playoff committee has followed suit with that. Whenever you lose a game, and particularly a team like BYU that they clearly weren't that high on to begin with, despite their record, I think that there's a good chance that BYU drops behind Boise State in their rankings, which will put Boise State as the projected 4th highest ranked conference champion.
I think that's totally fine. When you think we get to the end, assuming, let's go with, in this hypothetical, a Big 12 team, whoever it is that gets in, let's say they run the table the rest of the season. Whoever it is undefeated. They win their remaining 3 games. So the final 2 games and then the conference championship game. Do you think that team gets the 4 seed over Boise State, assuming Boise State also runs the table?
I think if it's Colorado or BYU, yes.
Okay.
I think if it were to be Arizona State, who obviously is still very much alive in this as they play BYU this week, I think that Arizona State has a chance to be the 12 seed. Like, I think that that's where we could end up there. But I think if it's BYU or Colorado, there's enough of a case to be made. And let's be clear, we know the playoff selection committee is an ESPN product and they want to put the bigger brands in there. So having Colorado be at 4 is a better proposition for them.
100%. Okay, cool. Glad we're on the same page there. 5, Ohio State?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. This is where I think we see some changes. I started changing up. So let me just go from where I was last week to this week. So 6, I went Georgia.
Okay.
I moved. So last week, I had Indiana 6, Georgia 7. I flip-flopped them this week. I think Georgia, home win against a top 12 team in Tennessee, or what was a top 12 team in Tennessee. I think they deserve to at least jump up. Obviously, I was a little bit more bullish on the Dogs staying in the bracket, so I'm obviously maybe a little bit skewed ahead of them. So this is where we can see some differences. But I put Georgia at 6.
So I have Penn State at 6. And again, I'm not a big Penn State believer at this point in the season. But at the end of the day, they had like everything that's in front of them and where they're currently ranked, they're not going to drop. They're not going to have a Big Ten championship game loss. They're not going to have any of that. And like, yes, Minnesota this week maybe is a bit of a tricky game, but at the same time, like I've said it before and I'll say it again, James Franklin wins the games that he's supposed to, and you're supposed to beat Minnesota. So I don't really have a whole lot of like fear that Penn State's going to lose that game.
I could see it getting a little interesting.
Oh, it absolutely could.
I could see Minnesota, because this is like it for them. This is their Super Bowl, obviously, and they've been playing better. So I could see it. Wouldn't surprise me. But so you put Penn State 6. Where'd you go 7?
7 is where I have Indiana. So 3 Big Ten teams at 5 through 7. And I think Indiana, I mean, I personally would have Indiana ahead of Penn State, but at the end of the day, like I know what this committee's going to do, and like that's where Indiana was. Indiana didn't play, so they're going to stay in the same spot. That's what's going to happen.
So I had Indiana 7. So again, Cody you went in Penn State 6, Indiana 7.
Correct.
And I went Georgia 6, Indiana 7. I went Penn State 8. So they've been in the same spot all 3 for me. They have not moved, which I think kind of is jiving with what we're saying, that they haven't really done anything. So they're good, but I think it's funny. Good? Penn State's like, everyone's talking about like, oh, Indiana easy schedule. Oh, like what if Texas loses to A&M, and like Penn State's just like, yep, let's just keep moving here.
Let's keep talking about Indiana and Texas. Let's not talk about the Nittany Lions at all.
Do we agree if Penn State were to lose? I don't know who they play the last week of the season, but it's nobody good.
No, it's nobody good.
Michigan State's in my head. I think they closed against Michigan State last year. But if Penn State were to lose a game, they're out.
They have Maryland in the finale in Happy Valley. So yes, if they lose a game to Minnesota or Maryland, you're out. There's no way you with the lack of resume and now a non-quality loss on your schedule, like you're not getting in there.
Yeah. Who'd you have at number 9?
So I haven't given my 8. My 8 is Notre Dame.
Oh, sorry, 8. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, and my 8 is Notre Dame. Again, same principle as Indiana, honestly. And honestly, these 3 teams are in the same boat. They haven't done anything to slip up, but we've seen where the committee ranks them. So, like, that's where they're going to be. Again, I don't think you talked about it last week or the week before. You talk about it every week. The Northern Illinois loss still looks horrible, and there's no doubt about that. But I think that's why Notre Dame is actually at 8 and not actually a little bit higher. Like, I think if they had if that one loss was to Texas A&M in the season opener, I think Notre Dame's probably actually higher in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Notre Dame's in my top 12. I didn't have any other choice. I had to put them in, but I'm still holding back some. I'm not giving them too much respect. So for me, I had Penn State at 8. So this is the first week where I think our brackets are really starting to deviate based on what we've done in the past and how we're adjusting.
Yeah.
So for me, this is where it got a little interesting for me, because a lot of these teams that were in like behind like the Tennessees of the world were on a bye. So I kind of just bumped everyone up a little bit. So I made Ole Miss 9, setting up a Penn State Ole Miss Citrus Bowl, I believe it was last year. Citrus or
I'm not sure which one it was.
Yes, Ole Miss. Hello, you got me?
Reed, you froze for a little bit there. You're back. You're good to go. We can hear you.
Okay.
But you were trying to remember what bowl game it was last year, and then you froze.
I can't remember which one it was, and maybe it was my brain glitching as well as the internet. But so I think Ole Miss 9, moving them up. The win, obviously, against Georgia, also kind of aging a little bit better, so they get a little bit of a boost on a bye. Of course, they're in Florida this weekend, so I put Ole Miss 9.
Okay, I have Alabama at 9, and you're really splitting hairs. I'll go ahead and spoil it. I have 3 SEC teams at 8 or at 9, 10, and 11, and you're really splitting hairs. But I do think that when I factor in Ole Miss versus Alabama, and I'm looking at this too, and we obviously don't have the head-to-head there, but Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky looks worse than either of Alabama's loss. So I'm going to value that a little bit more in there. So I have Alabama at 9, then I have Ole Miss at 10. So like I have them right there with one another.
I have Alabama at 10. So
okay, so yeah.
It's more for me that you're seeing Alabama, that loss against Vanderbilt, while better than Ole Miss's loss. I also just think the the recency of Ole Miss beating Georgia also playing a factor for me. And again, we're splitting hairs. It's all semantics, but that was for me. And honestly, looking back at my bracket from last week, I had Bama ahead of Ole Miss. So maybe I'm weighing too much of that recency to jumping them 2 on a bye week.
You just didn't like what you saw against Mercer from Alabama. Go
yeah, I wasn't impressed with how they took care of Mercer. So Bama 10, 11, I went Notre Dame. So this is where I have Notre Dame in. Again, we don't have to rehash the whole thing, just easy schedule. The loss is still pretty bad to me, but I think given where the rest of the field is going, for me, as someone who's been holding out putting Notre Dame in, they now need to be in the field. So I slotted them at 11. And look, it's my bracket on my piece of paper. Maybe I'll be so impressed with them destroying Army a couple miles away from my apartment that I'll bump them up to 8 or 9 like you, Cody.
You thinking about going? That'd be a fun game to go to.
So here's my hot take. I don't like watching football games live.
Okay. And that actually, I don't disagree with that take at all. I don't think it's that hot.
I'm first of all, you also have a million games on, and that would drive me insane when I'm not a fan of either team. But going to football games, I didn't really play football, so I don't like the art of it, I guess, is maybe a little different for me. But when I'm in the stadium, it's just tougher for me to get an understanding of what's going on, where I like watching, where I can see the fake line to gain. I can hear the commentators talk about an injury, things that enhance my viewing. For me, I would rate going to a football game way down from basketball and baseball. Those two, I think you really get a different experience and a better experience live.
And hockey too, honestly.
Hockey as well.
Live is incredible.
Football for me, it just doesn't hit the same way. I just personally enjoy watching it on my couch than going to the game. So that's just for me. So I considered going, honestly, because it is right here and it's a big game, but I think I'm going to pass. But it's still a sick game.
Oh yeah, we're college football sickos though. We got to have the multi-screen experience, so we're not feeling the stimulation that we need mentally. But I'll go ahead and put us back on the rails. I have Georgia at 11, and this really comes down to the head-to-heads for me and where I have Ole Miss and Alabama. I have Alabama at 9 and Ole Miss at 10. They both have a head-to-head win over Georgia, so I'm gonna put Georgia in right behind them at 11. But I think it's a comfortable 11. I don't think there's anyone really nipping at their heels currently. Is kind of where I sit with them.
Georgia's in.
Yeah.
They're playing UMass this week. They're going to win. And then they play Georgia Tech, which I guess Georgia Tech is a bit of a spoiler, but I think Georgia eased the concerns of getting in. It seems like they're good.
Absolutely. And so that means we both have Tennessee left out. Correct.
Yes. To me, when I was running through who's getting in, and then obviously I have Boise State 12, you have, is it Colorado 12?
BYU, because I think they're going to still be projected in the rankings a little bit higher than Colorado. And so by the rankings, they would be the projected Big 12 champion.
All right, that's fine. And I have Boise State at 12 as the G5 bid because I had Colorado at 4, the favorite to win the Big 12 now. So let's talk about this Tennessee thing before we get to our picks for this week.
Yeah.
It seems like to me, you're going to run through these simulations, and the most likely scenario, which does not mean it's going to happen given how this season has gone, but it does seem like when I really think about what's going to happen this season or the rest of the season, it seems like Tennessee's the odd team out. It seems like they're the one left holding the bag. Yes, they have a quality win against Alabama at home. Very nice. They're in the playoff. They lose at Georgia. Nothing wrong with that. I actually think they played pretty well in that game. It happens. They lose. Tighter game probably than Georgia kind of handled it, but not a blowout. That loss against Arkansas seems like it's going to be held against them because a team like Ole Miss, who has a really bad loss, and a team like Alabama, who has a really bad loss, were able to get a signature win against a team like Georgia that I think we could agree is maybe not ranked higher, but is viewed as a true monster win there that holds a lot of weight versus Alabama.
No, 100%. And I also think just as important as that, you look at the second biggest win for these programs. You look at Ole Miss handling South Carolina, 27-3, I think was the final in that one. And you look at Alabama with the way they manhandled LSU. What's Tennessee's second best win? It's nothing on the caliber of those two.
No.
So I think that's going to be weighed in pretty heavily when you consider Tennessee in this whole package. I don't think a win over Vanderbilt is going to be enough, quite frankly. And that's basically the only opportunity they have left on their schedule.
And you know what? If you really kind of keep going or you play out, you're going to need some serious chaos. Because to me, what like looks like the easy plug and play type scenario is Texas A&M beats Texas at home. But the issue is A&M is going to jump into the field. So what you really need is you need Auburn to beat Texas A&M this week, then A&M to beat Texas next week, and hope that Texas is viewed so poorly that Tennessee gets in over Texas, which I still think is kind of a coin flip in that scenario.
No, 100%. And the other thing, like, quite frankly, Tennessee's also at this point with the chaos that we've seen getting a little screwed by auto bids because like they're probably going to be ranked, if you're just looking at the pure top 25, ahead of BYU, ahead of Colorado, ahead of Boise State. But they have the auto bids. And so that's going to like take a spot away from a team like Tennessee.
Yeah, I think Tennessee's cleanest path in is either I don't even know where the SEC maybe like Ole Miss losing to Florida this week or something, but maybe it's, and I don't even know how this is going to go, but Indiana gets dump trucked by Ohio State and the committee's like, well, like you really haven't done anything. So we're going to give like the SEC nod, or Penn State loses in an upset. And like Tennessee, it seems like unfortunately for them, obviously they need to win out. They play UTEP this week, then Vanderbilt. And then you're really hoping like somebody just gets taken out that we're not seeing coming. One of these teams outside the top 5, not even. I mean, pretty much you need anyone but like Oregon or Bama, Oregon or I don't know, Ohio State, Georgia. Like you need one of those teams in the middle to really just drop one and hope Tennessee kind of falls backwards in, because I don't really see a world where they kind of walk into the playoff here.
No, and like I don't think it's likely, but like I think the best chaos scenario for Tennessee is Alabama losing at Oklahoma this week. I think that's the best.
Or Auburn.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, but I don't know. I guess I have a higher faith in the ceiling of Oklahoma than I do of Auburn at this point.
So Tempe Kids jumps in, and this is actually a really good point that I think we've discussed in the prior iterations of doing this, but not this week. Tempe Kid says, did you see Kiffin saying there's serious discussions in the SEC about whether or not teams want to play in the SEC championship game? The implication being, let's say a team like Texas A&M or even Alabama, who has the inside track to going to the SEC title game. If they were to lose in the SEC title game, that would be a third loss for some of these teams. Does that disqualify you from making the playoff? Because the idea is that 3 losses is kind of the death nail for you. It's possible. We don't know. We've never done this before. I think that cooler heads would prevail. And if you make the conference title game and you're in beforehand, barring an injury or a blowout loss that's like really a bad look, like if you just lose like a competitive good game and you're just on the wrong side, I think you're good.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. You're saying Big Ten and SEC specifically, because in the ACC and Big 12, I think it's a different conversation.
Totally different. I think if you were in before the title game and you play fine and you're all healthy and your quarterback doesn't get seriously injured, basically, I think you're good. I think that the committee will say, you know what? You get brought down to the lowest possible ranking. To me, because I agree with what Lane Kiffin's saying.
Yeah,
the implication is, why would I ever want to compete for the SEC title game if I get bumped from the playoff? It defeats the whole purpose of a conference championship game if the loss means you lose out on everything. It's too risky to then go.
No, 100%. Like, I understand Lane Kiffin and like apparently these other SEC coaches. I understand the mentality because you're taking out a risk factor, because like I agree with you, cooler heads should prevail, and whoever, like if Alabama goes to the SEC championship game and loses to A&M or Texas, whoever it would be, like if they were to lose that game, I still think they're more than deserving of being in the college football playoff, specifically where they are going to be in these last few projected brackets. But at the same time, that's what you're hoping. You don't know that. Yeah. Whereas if you're Ole Miss, who really doesn't have a whole lot of paths to the SEC championship game right now, you're sitting pretty because you're in the field and there's no real risk factors of knocking you out right now, other than like if you win the rest of your games, you're fine.
I completely agree. And it's why it's almost a team like Penn State. You know what I mean? Like they don't even want to make the Big Ten title game. Let's just win our 2 games and get to the playoff. So I agree. And I think that because this is the first year, we're seeing some concern of like, well, what happens? I don't think you could outright say if you make it, you're immune, because then you open up a lot more possibilities. I think it's more of an unsaid thing that if you show up and you play decent, you're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we don't know. And that's why I think some of these, do we want to make the conference title game? I would think that, especially with the SEC and Big Ten, they would not screw these teams over. I think if there was really an ACC team that had a clean path, or two ACC teams that had a clean path, then it would be a little interesting how it's handled. And I think that's why the committee hasn't said anything just yet.
Yeah.
But I also think ACC, I don't really see a path for two teams to get. Like, I don't.
No.
What's the path here? Like, SMU, if it's SMU Miami, the loser of that game has no real grounds to go into the game or to go into the playoff, even with only two losses.
No, I completely agree with you in the ACC. Like, had Miami been undefeated going into there, like you said, a clean path, like that would be a different conversation that we're having. Like, if Miami goes 12-1 with a loss being in the ACC championship game, that would be a conversation. But that's not going to be the case anymore. They would be 11-2 at that point. On the Alabama front, though, if Alabama were to lose the SEC championship game, I can already hear the Tennessee fans starting to talk about it, because that'd give you a 3-loss Alabama team with Tennessee sitting right there on the bubble. And we have the head-to-head over Alabama. We have that win. So, like, you can make the case for Tennessee. I'm sure Tennessee fans would love to make the case of why Tennessee should be in that spot.
Yeah, this was like always my thing with the expanded playoff, because and by the way, this is awesome. Like, the games are going to be awesome. It's going to be a great season. But, like, one team or two teams are always getting screwed, whether it's team 5 and 6 in the old way or it's team 13 and 14 in the new way. You're not going to fix what the issues are. There's always going to be teams with like comparable resumes, and there's always going to be arguments. So it solves some things and it makes the season a little longer and more exciting and more money, but it doesn't necessarily solve we're putting in everybody. Every year is kind of different. Yeah. And for this year, it seems like a few teams are going to have some gripes.
No, they literally, all that changes is the teams that we're talking about and the records that we're talking about, as opposed to Florida State being undefeated and, does a 1-loss team deserve to be in over them? It's now, do these 2 or 3-loss teams deserve to be in over one another?
Yeah. So with that, great stuff on the college football playoff. Before we get to our picks for week 13, Cody, you want to tell us about our sponsor today?
Of course, and it's Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes this football season. Which players are going off, which ones are ice cold. Make your entries in just a few taps and turn your sports opinions into real money. Join over 5 million fans that are already playing on Underdog. With their pick'em game, you could win money by making entries with your favorite players. Underdog is the best place to play champions, so sign up now and deposit using the promo code STACKINGTHEBOX, one word, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. I love Underdog for all the options that are offered on the platform and the chance to be as aggressive or unaggressive as I want to be with my picks. This week, I'm playing it a little safe, but I like Jalen Milroe higher than 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns. Seems like a pretty fair belief on my part that the most dangerous running quarterback in the country might put one in the end zone with his legs. But download the app today and use the code STACKINGTHEBOX, all one word, to get up $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Higher or lower, you make the call on Underdog with your picks. Must be 18 and over, 19 and over in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 and over in Colorado for some games, 21 and over in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. Underdog, man. It's always good.
Always good with Underdog. Let's move on to the week 13 slate. We got a handful of marquee matchups, but we can't pass on the weeknight games. We got 3, 5, 6. We got 9 weeknight games. And next week we have, what is it? I think Friday is like almost like 30, it's like a third of the games on Friday. I know Thursday's one game, Tulane, Memphis. I think that might be it though. I don't know if Maction's going on next week, but Cody, where are you going weeknight games?
Yeah, we are going Maction. We'll go a little bit Wednesday night Maction. We're going to Toledo, and I'm taking Ohio plus 2.5 at Toledo. Reed, would you like to hear the forecast for Toledo, Ohio on Wednesday night?
Please tell me. I can only imagine what it is in Toledo.
It sounds
In
awful, quite frankly.
middle November.
Low 40s, high 30s for a temperature with 20 to 30 mile per hour winds sustained throughout this game. You know what? That's probably going to make it hard to do. Throw the damn football. And yes, Tempe Kids is right. It is supposed to snow on Wednesday morning or on Thursday morning. That could bleed into Wednesday. So we have a really ugly weather game where I think it's going to be hard to throw the football. Well, that really favors Ohio in this matchup. Toledo is 114th in success rate in terms of running the ball this year. They have really relied on their passing game. So I think that, Tempe Kids is giving us the local forecast. He is an Ohioan himself. So love to see that. That explains a lot of the Ohio State takes I've seen from Tempe Kids as well. But no, Toledo is just the far worse run team in this matchup. Now, granted, these are both pretty decent run defenses. So I don't think it's going to be a blowout in Ohio's case, but the projected total when I ran the numbers for this game in normal weather would be in the 50s, and the total is set in the mid 40s. So that tells you that they think it's going to be a lower scoring game, that some of these possessions are going to get pretty ugly. For me, I think Ohio's run game is just much more reliable and much more effective than what we've seen from Toledo this season. So in a matchup that just simply stylistically is going to favor the Bobcats, I like them as an underdog in this matchup, especially in the MAC where I think most of these teams are pretty evenly matched for the most part. So I think that when you get these two teams and it stylistically favors the other, I'm going to take the underdog.
Yeah, I like some early Ohio. I did not get to the window, but I like Ohio quite a bit here. I think there's a good case that they're actually the better team. And you mentioned some great stuff about the weather and how Ohio wants to run the ball. Should set up for a nice matchup for them. For me, I'm going to go NC State plus 9 against Georgia Tech. Don't love a lot of the weeknight stuff, but this is just a big number for Georgia Tech, where last time we saw them and what they've been able to do all year and in the Brent Key era is cover and win as an underdog. They're a great underdog team. Same as the sponsors, Underdog Fantasy, but they're not great laying a ton of points. And last time we saw them against Miami, they basically run a triple option. Haynes King could not throw the ball. Now, look, that was 2 weeks ago, so maybe his shoulder's a little bit better. But if this is going to be like a slow, methodical approach, we also don't know the status of Georgia Tech's top 3 running backs that all got hurt in that Miami game. So I'm not sure that we're going to see a blowout effort here from Tech. Meanwhile, NC State, up and down year, few unfortunate losses, close losses. At times, this offense has looked dynamic with the freshman CJ Bailey and a pretty good group of receivers. They need one more win for bowl eligibility. Georgia Tech already got that standalone game. I don't trust Georgia Tech to really lay it on NC State. I think these two teams are kind of closer to equal still. I give the slight nod to Georgia Tech, obviously at home, but I think just too many points here at over a touchdown. So I like State catching 9.
No, I like this pick a lot. I think you nailed it on the head with just the idea of Georgia Tech as basically or almost a double-digit favorite. I think Georgia Tech probably wins this game. I think it's within a possession, though.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Saturday slate, our biggest game on the card, one of the biggest games of the season. Indiana travels to Columbus to take on Ohio State, take their undefeated record to Ohio Stadium and take on the Buckeyes, who are the betting favorite to win the national championship game. Got Ohio State laying 12.5, total of 52.5. Cody, where do you lay in this game?
It's too many points, man. Give me Indiana plus 12.5. And I feel like I'm on an island. I feel like everyone is saying, okay, the buck stops here for Indiana. I'm not saying Indiana wins the game, but I do think 12.5 is just a few too many points for me, especially because we've seen this line move from where it opened up a couple weeks ago. This line opened, I think, at 9.5 a couple weeks ago, and it's ballooned a little bit to 12.5. It moved since yesterday, I believe. It was at 11.5 yesterday. So it keeps coming in. Ohio State's, becoming a heavier favorite. Ohio State's offensive line is still not fixed. They play Purdue and Northwestern, so it looked better, but you're playing Purdue and Northwestern. Now you're going up against an Indiana team that still has the 4th best pass rush grade, according to PFF this season. I think that they're able to affect the game a little bit. And I also think that Ohio State might have a bit more trouble running the ball effectively, consistently in this game. Honestly, when I look at this game, I think it gives us some similar vibes to what we saw with Ohio State, Penn State. And granted, it is in Columbus, so maybe that's a factor, but I do think that we saw the Ohio State offense really not working at full capacity. Yes, it had its moments, and yes, they probably should have won by 2 scores if Will Howard doesn't fumble at the goal line. But I do think that that kind of tight game where, one play like a Will Howard fumble can really keep the game closer than it should be. I think we're trending towards that. I also think that when you look at Indiana, I think the Michigan game, I'm actually using that as almost a positive experience because that was when we talked about what Indiana has been through this season. I think that you look at Michigan, despite all the flaws that team has, they're still the number 1 graded pass rush in the entire country this season. Ohio State is good, but they're in the outside of the top 20 in terms of pass rush grade, according to PFF. So it's not as fierce as what Michigan threw at them. So I think the offensive line holds up a little bit better, but I also think they're not as scared by the helmet. I think that Indiana in that moment, I think we saw them tighten up a little bit with their play calling. They were just trying to protect the lead. And that's not how Indiana has played this entire season. I think they get away from that, and I think they played their brand of football. Again, I still think Ohio State probably wins this game, but 12.5 points I think is too many.
Yeah, I'm not joining you on the island. I'm laying it with the Buckeyes. And look, all great points, by the way. So, and this isn't, I think, like some slam dunk. Ohio State definitely rolls. I could see a path to Indiana keeping up. But I was talking as a Wisconsin grad. My sister went to Indiana. I know a lot of people that went to Indiana. Love Bloomington. Great place to go. But I was talking to some Indiana people who were like astonished with the season and how great it's been and everything. And they were asking me, they're like, how far do you think this could really go? Like, where's like the ceiling for this team? Because they keep kind of breaking through. And I said, you're probably going to run into a buzzsaw when you play Ohio State. And ultimately, Indiana is a G5 all-star team. They're a bunch of veterans that are coming together and playing at above their typical level. Ohio State's got 4 and 5 stars out the wazoo. They got the ball boy is a 5-star recruit. So to me, I think this is one where while Indiana can compete because it's a football game and anything can happen, I just think it's more likely that the talent wears out here. And that's where you see some differences. Indiana has played one team inside the top 75 in EPA per pass this season. That was Washington. And I know like their backup quarterback was in, but Washington outgained Indiana in that game. I know the Hoosiers got a win there, but wasn't super impressive. And then I go back to the Michigan game where, as you kind of alluded to, that was the first truly elite unit they faced all season. Like the Michigan defense is elite still. And while the offense can't keep up, that was the first time Indiana really faced some like true blue chip pedigree. In that game, Indiana had a negative 0.24 EPA per play, 11th percentile, and they had 4.48 yards per play, 16th percentile. They only scored 20 points. Some of it was they got ahead and they kind of sat on it, they turtled and all that. But for me, I think Ohio State's just too dynamic that they can really test. And while the defensive line can maybe hold up, I think the likes of like Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, I think that's where you see the issues, is the fact that I see a path to Ohio State ripping off explosives where Indiana can't do that as reliably. I'm sure there's going to be some gadget plays. I'm sure they're going to have some things cooked up, but I just think the talent wears out here and Ohio State covers the 12.5. I think they win by 2 scores.
I see where you're coming from. I think this is both a thing where like we respect each other's points. We just see things a little differently. I will say one thing that colors this a little bit for me is you mentioned Smith, you mentioned Egbuka, you mentioned Carnell Tate, you mentioned all these guys that Ohio State has. I still worry a little bit about Will Howard, man. Like I think that Will Howard as a passer, he's left a lot of meat on the bone this season. Like Ohio State could have had some bigger blowouts than what they've had this season because I think Will Howard is frankly just imperfect. He's not a bad player by any stretch of the imagination. And I do think he's an upgrade from Kyle McCord last year, but I just think that he's left a lot of meat on the bone that does concern me, especially against a team like Indiana, who, like you said, is going to have stuff prepared solely for this game.
Yeah. And I think, I know where like the pass rush grades are and everything, but I still think Penn State's defensive line is like better than Indiana's. And I think that's maybe where we see the difference. I just think, again, like just like blue chip talent, I just think Ohio State's prepared for this a little bit more than Indiana, because you make a good point that, hey, maybe they kind of got over that mental hurdle against Michigan, but now you got to deal with like two-way action. You got to deal with both the offense and the defense. It's a little different. But as Tempe Kids jumps in, says might be close early. OSU is dominant in the second half. That's just where I come down.
So is Indiana. So is Indiana. I'm just saying.
It's just I think there's a level that Ohio State can get to that Indiana can't get to, which doesn't mean that it has to happen on Saturday. But I just think like it's more likely to happen than not.
So I think I come down with like what you're saying as why Ohio State is a better national championship contender than Indiana is.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's I'm not reinventing the wheel by saying that, but I am saying that like I think for one game, Indiana can keep this close. I think if you ask Indiana to do it for 4 games against this level of talent in this competition, yeah, they're going to get smoked at some point. But I think for one game, and that's all the conversation has been about with the Hoosiers is this is the one game that like is actually difficult in their entire regular season schedule. I think you can pull out enough tricks to be able to keep it within a touchdown and a field goal. Like give me a 10-point loss and I still cover this.
That's fine. That's okay. We move on to the Big 12 now, where we thought we were going one way, and then they took a quick left turn, and we're going down another way because the conference title picture has now centered around Colorado, Arizona State, BYU, and maybe Iowa State. And we have a lot of consequential games on the line here. Colorado going to Arrowhead Stadium to take on Kansas, Coach Prime's team, which Heisman Trophy frontrunner Travis Hunter and his son, quarterback Shedeur Sanders, 2.5-point favorite, total of 59.5 against a Kansas team that it looked like was just the snake-bitten team of the year. Mm-hmm. Couldn't win a close game, couldn't stay out of its own way. All of a sudden, Kansas won 3 of 4 now, and their only loss was a heartbreaking loss to Kansas State. Kansas spoiled BYU season, kind of threw Iowa State out of the driver's seat in the Big 12. Can they do it again for a third straight week and beat Colorado?
They could not. I'm taking Colorado -2.5 in this one. And first off, like the first reason I went this way was honestly just pure vibes. Because you look at what Iowa State and you look at BYU coming into those matchups against Kansas. Iowa State was coming off their first loss, reeling a little bit, and they had been playing some close games prior to that as well. So it kind of felt like they were just trying to keep the wheels on. BYU coming off a holy war where they very much were trying to keep the wheels on in that game right at the end. And like, it just seemed like they were trending toward, okay, we're flirting with a lot of trouble. Honestly, a very similar vibe to what we saw with Miami going into that Georgia Tech game where like you're flirting with disaster so much that you're going to get bit at some time. Now you look at Colorado coming into this game. Colorado is trending in the opposite direction. Colorado is getting better as the season goes on. They didn't even play particularly well against Utah last week. And granted, I don't think Utah's anything to write home about, but like they didn't play well against Utah. They hung up 40.
Let me just really quick. I think Utah gets like almost a bad rap because the offense is so bad. That defense is still
top absolutely.
And they're playing hard. So I almost think like because they just really quick, Colorado did get beat up a little bit on the offensive line. But Utah to me is still an elite defense, which I think you can make a good case they're the best defense in the Big 12 still. And like they're nationally good. So
quite possibly, yeah.
I don't think like that was necessarily like obviously you want to like play well, but it wasn't necessarily like a bad look, like a crappy Utah team went in there and like pushed around Colorado's offensive line.
No, 100%. And like early in that game, they were pushing around, but then like Colorado's made adjustments this year that they weren't making last year. Like through the second half of that game, Colorado was dominating every phase of the game. Won by 25, hung 49 points on what you said, is a good defense. And I look at the way that's trending, and despite Kansas limiting what BYU was able to do offensively, I just don't have the faith that they're going to be able to do the same thing with Colorado. Colorado has more weapons that can beat them. Colorado has a better quarterback in place than Jake Retzlaff. I'm no offense to him, but Shedeur is a much better quarterback than him. And then I think Colorado defensively, frankly, offers a little bit more of a challenge right now because of the way their pass rush has been performing. And I think like those explosive plays that Kansas has been able to get in the passing game, I think that they're able to limit some of those, particularly with the way they've been covering as well. You have Travis Hunter, but I think the secondary's played pretty well as well. I do think Kansas is able to score in this game. Don't get me wrong. Like I think they're able to run the ball pretty well because that's what they do. But I do think that I don't think they're able to be as effective and consistent offensively as what Colorado is going to be able to do because we've seen no evidence over the past month that there's any defense in the Big 12 that can contain Colorado.
That's where I land on the game. Kansas can win, but I think Colorado is starting to realize their ceiling, and that ceiling is the best team in the Big 12. And Kansas, their ceiling is like an upper middle team in the Big 12. Like they're obviously better than their record at 4-6, but they're also 4-6, where
Right.
Colorado's 8-2, and like sure, like but like they have the talent to actually justify that rating. So while I thought like I was going to be on the Kansas side of things, the more I thought about this game, I kind of lean with yours. I went for the Colorado team total over because I do think if Kansas wins, it's in a shootout. So Jalen Daniels, and this is kind of like part of the whole thing, but he's still like making a lot of like poor decisions. It's just like some of those turnover worthy plays haven't turned into turnovers.
Right.
19 big time throws, 16 turnover worthy plays. He's playing really well lately, but like I watched that entire BYU Kansas game. I don't want to say it was a lucky cover for Kansas, but the way that game was going, BYU dictated the terms of that one. They outgained him by over 100 yards. Red zone interception before half, red zone stop by Kansas, the pooch punt that led to a touchdown for Kansas. Like, I wouldn't say that was like a truly, like the Iowa State game was a really impressive win. This one was more of a nice, like you got BYU, like you did it. Like, I wouldn't say it was like a wow, like Kansas is certainly really onto something here.
No, 100%. I mean, there were multiple throws. Going back to the Jalen Daniels point, there were multiple throws in that game where I was like, how is that ball not picked off? Like, how, like, it kind of went to our breakdown and our handicap of that game where, we're not sure. We think Kansas's defense is a little bit more opportunistic, and like that's kind of the recipe for the upset. And so, like, I just don't. Shador's not going to put the ball in harm's way the same way that Retzlaff did.
So that's my thing. Kansas' strength is in the secondary. That's the better part of their defense. They're 62nd in EPA per play. But they're also outside the top 100 in explosive pass rate. So to that, what it means, in my opinion, is Kansas is good stopping passes, right? But when they let the opposition get loose, they're ripping off chunk gains. And we've seen when they play the better passing offenses on their schedule, TCU, Arizona State, they're able to move the ball pretty easily through the air. And now they're facing easily the best one that they've seen all season, and that's Colorado. And in those games, TCU scored 35 plus, Arizona State got 35. So I just think Kansas can be able to score here. And I also wonder, can Colorado's pass rush get home on Kansas and put Jalen Daniels, make a few of those mistakes and everything? So this kind of sets up similarly to the Texas Tech game a few weeks ago where, it's Colorado on the road. Probably going to be much easier to play in an Arrowhead versus playing in Lubbock. But like talented team, frisky team that can do a lot of things. But to me, Colorado has a gear that Texas Tech can't get to. And I wonder if that's going to happen again, where Colorado's a gear that Kansas can't get to and they take it home. I think they do it in a higher scoring effort.
I think that the higher scoring part of that is absolutely right. And to the Arrowhead point, like, I think there's a legitimate chance that it's almost a neutral field at this point because Colorado is becoming a national fan base, and like Kansas football, yes, has grown in popularity, but not enough to fill Arrowhead Stadium. Let's be clear about that. 100%. So like, I think like it's probably actually a pretty split crowd.
Yeah. And then the other leg of the chaotic 3:30 slate we're going to be watching between Big 12 teams. BYU, we just talked about them, off the loss, undefeated season now up in the air. It's much worse than that, though, because they're going on the road to face an Arizona State team that now is a win and in to the Big 12 title game. Kenny Dillingham's team has really been impressive off a shellacking in the Little Apple against Kansas State. Really whooped them. BYU obviously off the loss. State laying 3 at home against BYU with a total of 48.5. Cody, where you at in this one?
I'm going with the over 48.5 in this one. And honestly, you mentioned, I don't remember if it was pre-show at the beginning of this show, but that you wish you had just gone on the Kansas side with me in that Kansas BYU game instead of getting cute and going with the over. I actually really liked your handicap, and I think the same handicap kind of applies to this game. So I think that the process was right. So I'm going to stick with the process, and I'm going to take the over in this game. In the matchup itself, I think BYU is able to find explosive pass plays in this game. ASU's defense is 96 in defensive success rate versus dropbacks. We've seen BYU be able to find explosives in the passing game this season. I think they are going to be there against this Arizona State defense, where their weakness is kind of in the secondary and what they're able to do there. On the flip side, though, I think that the Sun Devils with Sam Levitt and Cam Scatterbo, I think that dual threat rushing attack is really able to do, like, set up explosive plays for their passing game, which we've seen BYU is also susceptible to. And I also think that they're just able to move the ball consistently and stay on the field and hold the ball and control the game with possessions. but I do think that we get enough explosive plays to get to a total that frankly is not that high. I think last week was just kind of an outlier and maybe is giving us some value in depressing what the total is in this game. I also think it is important that this game is in Tempe and not in Provo. I think the fact that this is in Tempe, like things get a little loose in Tempe. I think anyone who's ever been to Tempe can attest to that. So like I think we see the football game follow suit.
I like Arizona State in this game. This has been my team kind of all year. I got a serious long shot ticket that I'm really hoping gets on here.
I love to see it.
Yeah, before the I think I took them on the show. I said Arizona State beating Utah on that Friday night, and I also jumped on some big number on them to win the Big 12, and now we're somehow here. I think this matchup sets up really nicely for them, and I really hope they can get it home for my sake. But I do think this matchup sets up pretty well for them. Both sides of the ball, though, really in the trenches is where this starts. So we'll start on the defense. Arizona State's defense is top 15 in EPA per rush, just shut down really Kansas State's really potent rushing attack. This BYU offense, I think it may not look like it based on like how you've watched the team, but I think it's centered around their run game with LJ Martin healthy. I think that's where they really thrive. And I don't think they're going to find any success on the ground in this one. It's going to put a lot of pressure on Jake Retzlaff to make plays. He looked a little banged up against Kansas, took a few big shots. The arm, he was playing with it a lot. So maybe there's something lingering there. He's also made suspect decisions all season, and maybe it's starting to catch up with him. 12 big-time throws to 13 turnover-worthy plays. So I just don't know if they're really going to see a lot of success on offense. So maybe this goes against your over bet. But on the other side, I do think Arizona State could cook in this one. Cam Spadabow, fully healthy last week, playing a BYU rush defense that's bottom half of the country in EPA per rush. And again, if I think Retzlaff might make mistakes, I don't think Sam Levitt is. Only 3 turnover-worthy plays all season. Guy is really stuck to Kenny Dillingham's offense all season. Dillingham, a wizard offensive coordinator, now a head coach at Arizona State, just calling like really good games. And we saw Levitt ball out against Kansas State. I think we could maybe see something similar here. So I just think like this is a great matchup for Arizona State. And I know a lot of people might be like, oh, well, you know, kind of fluky win against UCF. And, oh, well, like they got so many turnovers against Kansas State. Like, I get it. Cam Spadabow was out one game. And I know turnovers are one thing, but they also went up 24-0. And the game was pretty much over after that. So maybe it's fluky, but weren't we just saying the same thing about BYU? Like, I don't think fluke losses like just happen when you want them to. You know what I mean? Like there's like a sequence of events here. So I just think this is a really good matchup for Arizona State, and I think they could take care of business.
No, 100%. And I honestly don't hate your handicap for the over because frankly, I like 48.5, not a big total. No. Let's be clear about that. Like that's not a high total that we need a ton of points. Like I can see Arizona State controlling this and winning something like 31-20, which gets me home and gets you home. And like, I think that's very much in play.
And we're in Tempe where things get loose. So
that's what I'm saying, possible. Man.
I just think more than anything, and this isn't an anti-BYU stance because I don't think they're very good. Because Arizona State isn't a bunch of world beaters either, but I think it's a bad matchup as I just laid out. And that's what really brought me to this one. So I'm over 3. I think Arizona State's got the clear matchup edges here. So I like the Sun Devils to move one step closer to the Big 12 title game. We move on to our upset pick of the week. Last week, I got home. Cody, who'd you have last week?
I had Nebraska. Golly.
That was a tough one.
That one hurt a lot.
That was a tough one. That was a crazy game. Where are you going this week?
I'm going to Old Faithful, a team that's already cashed me twice as an underdog this year, and that is the Vanderbilt Commodores, going to Death Valley and pulling off the upset, plus 225 on the money line. I'm not sure why I should believe in LSU at this point. What does this team have to play for? They're out of the SEC championship race. They're out of the college football playoff race. Brian Kelly's turning purple, yelling at his kids on the sideline. Like, what motivation do they have? And also, like, Garrett Nussmeier has not looked right the past week and a half to me. He looks like something's wrong. And if you take away the passing element of LSU's offense, this team is not good. And the one thing about Vanderbilt metric-wise doesn't grade out well in a whole lot of places. The one place that they do is success rate on dropbacks. They're 32nd in the country. We know Diego Pavia is an absolute dog. And we know that this LSU defense is susceptible to giving up explosive plays, to giving up consistent drives. We've seen that formula work for Vanderbilt before. Diego Pavia doesn't even have to be efficient for them to pull off an upset. They beat Auburn when he was 9 of 22 passing. And I think that when you combine that with the potential for an LSU quit watch, I just think that Vanderbilt is, again, not being respected as a mid-tier SEC team. I think they're still being considered the Vanderbilt of old who got lucky in a couple spots, and I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, tough to trust LSU at this point in the season, just where this
exactly
it's going. For me, team that cashed me last week on the money line, going to go right back to the well. I'm going to take Troy plus 330 against Louisiana. I mean, this Troy team, I'm telling you, they're up to something. This third-string quarterback, Matthew Caldwell, I'm telling you, this guy is.
I was watching that game and thinking about you being like, this third-string quarterback, and I was like, you know what? He's actually playing some good ball.
They whooped Georgia Southern. That was a thorough handling there against Georgia Southern, and I think they can maybe do it again. Louisiana potentially down to backup quarterback Chandler Fields, Ben Woolridge, potential collarbone injury. I don't know how big of the drop-off is, but I do know that this Louisiana defense continues to be a concern. Outside the top 120 in EPA per play, big favorite. Don't know if I trust them. Now you got a backup quarterback in there against a Troy team that is trending in the right direction. I know they don't have much to play for, but Louisiana, look, we'll see where it goes with the backup quarterback, if that's how it's going to be. But Louisiana just needs one more win to get to the Sun Belt title game. I know that means Reed, aren't they just going to try and win this game? It's very possible, but you also have 2 games left. So this doesn't need to necessarily be Louisiana's going to rout them like they've been able to. I think it's a big number for a team trending in the right direction. Louisiana's kind of been the offense is really good, but if it's going to drop off, the defense is really vulnerable. So I like the Trojans here.
I mean, it's aggressive. There's no doubt about it, but I don't hate the look because the Sun Belt, I just don't think there's much separation in the Sun Belt right now.
The Sun Belt is the G5 version of the Big 12. They're all the same.
That's a great
It's just a worse version.
I like that. I like that a lot. But yeah, I mean, and I feel the same way about the Big 12 that I do the Sun Belt. No team should be this heavy of a favorite against any of the other quality teams in the league.
And Troy's playing, I know it sounds crazy, but Troy's playing a average to above average Sun Belt team over the last month or so. So Troy's trending up.
They're Sun Belt Kansas. Let's keep the analogy going.
Okay, yeah. Listen, let's do it. But they can't win this week. We need Colorado to win.
That's right.
What's your Sickos pick for this week? What did we do last week on Sickos pick?
Sickos pick.
I won my Sickos pick. You lost yours. Yours wasn't. That was brutal.
That was one of the worst football games I've ever watched in my entire life. Oh my God. It was truly sicko stuff. Horrendous football all around. And so why not do it again with probably the worst game on the entire slate? Charlotte FAU over 48.5.
The interim coach bowl.
Exactly. We've got no full-time head coaches in this game. You'll love to see it. I am sad that we don't have Biff Poggi out there in his cutoff with the meat sleeves hanging out. But here's the thing. When a coach gets fired, I tend to look to the offense to kind of rebound, to kind of get a little bit of juice behind that unit. I think we can see that with both of these teams because particularly FAU, Tom Herman's an offensive mind, an offensive recruiter, but I don't think he was fully putting that together. But the other factor in this game, both these defenses are dog water. They're 2 of the worst defenses in the country. They're absolutely terrible. The over has hit in 7 out of 10 games for both of these teams. Over this total of 48.5 has hit in 7 out of 10 games for both of these teams. They just get into shootouts, and frankly, they lose most of those shootouts. But yes. I think when you get the interim coaches in here, I think we're going to see more juice on offense than we do on defense. And with a lower total for teams that have been trending towards the over generally, I think 48.5 we're getting a little bit of value with maybe the markets thinking that there's a pullback on offense, but I think it's going to be the opposite.
Very possible. For me, I took another stinky over as well. Took the over 44 in Air Force versus Nevada. So Air Force maybe onto a little something here. Put up 30 plus against Fresno State. Beat Oregon State 28-0 last week. Playing a Nevada team that, they get an extra week to prepare for the triple option, but you can't really quantify how poor this Nevada defense is over the balance of the season. The team is 122nd in EPA per rush, allowing nearly 5 yards per carry, and outside top 115 in explosive pass defense. So I think Air Force can be able to get together a few quality drives in this one with their ability to keep it on the ground. And Nevada, their offense has been solid all year long. Tempe kids tell me better hope Nevada can score 30. I don't know. Air Force the offense is coming to life here, but Nevada, the offense has been dynamic as well. Jeff Choate, this new offensive staff, has really gotten some quality play from Brendan Lewis, dynamic threat. I mean, Nevada overall this season, top 15 EPA per play. We've seen teams score on Air Force pretty regularly here. So it's a low total. It's going to be slow. So I'm going to need to cash in on the few opportunities I get. But I think there could be some big plays here. And it's a loose game, 2 teams out of it. I need 3 touchdowns and a field goal. I don't know. Just seems low. Tempe kids. I think Air Force could maybe find a couple touchdowns there. So I took the over 44 between Air Force and Nevada.
It's gross. No doubt about it. But I like it. I do like it. I do like it because, like, I do think that I don't think Nevada getting 30 is out of the question, frankly. Like, I truly don't think that's too crazy of a proposition. Yeah,
I mean, Tempe kids, Nevada's only laying 3.5, so you could get in there. But I just recent scores would indicate that Air Force's offense is not good, but it is trending in the right direction. Again, they really got all over Fresno State, who has a shaky rush defense. So maybe this little midseason blip is starting to go in. This late season blip is starting to turn into something. And Nevada on the other side, we've seen them obviously they're off some losses, but 21 against Boise State, 21 against Colorado State. I just think that this team, and even when they played Oregon State, they scored 42. So I think we could see some scores in this one, and we get over this really, really low total. But great show, Cody. Got through a lot there. Really good CFP talk and hopefully some winning picks as well. We're still in a nail biter here. I'm a half game behind you overall. Why don't you recap our picks?
Yeah, it's a nail biter of mediocrity as we're both 5 and 6 games below 500. But so weeknight, I like Ohio plus 2.5 at Toledo. Indiana, Ohio State, give me Indiana as the dog plus 12.5. Colorado, I like as the favorite at minus 2.5 against Kansas. I like the over 48.5 in BYU, Arizona State. Give me Vanderbilt plus 225 on the money line to go into Death Valley and keep their reign of upsets continuing against LSU. And then Sickos pick, give me Charlotte FAU over 48.5.
I love it. And for me, I took NC State plus 9 against Georgia Tech, Ohio State minus 12.5 against Indiana, the Colorado team total over 30.5, Arizona State minus 3, Troy on the money line, you get that plus 330, and Air Force Nevada over 44. That's our show for today. We will be back for the regular season finale of Stacking the Box. For Cody Williams, I'm Reed Wallach. Enjoy the games this week. Hopefully you're on the right side of some lucky bounces, unlike me with San Jose State last week. But enjoy the games this week. We will be back for our Week 14 preview. Enjoy the games.
We'll see you.